Welcome to Food Psych, a podcast about intuitive eating, body positivity, and health at every size. I'm your host, Christy Harrison, and I'm a registered dietitian, nutritionist, and certified intuitive eating counselor specializing in weight-inclusive wellness. Join me as I talk with interesting people from all walks of life about their relationships with food.
I remember I was teething, little gums bleeding, cried every evening, it was all about eating. When I became a teen, it was all about beefing. Now I'm ready for the world, trying to sink my teeth in, stacking extra.
Hey there, welcome to episode 89 of Food Psych. I have an amazing guest for you today. Vivian McMaster is on the show. She is a body positive photographer and photography teacher whose online courses help you use photography for body positivity and self-love. Her courses have helped so many people, and I think they're such a unique take on the whole photography for body acceptance movement because it's more about self-portraiture than nude selfies. And so we get into kind of the distinctions and why it's important to sort of look at yourself from many different angles, and also Vivian's story of recovering her body image and relationship with food, partly through photography. So we'll get into all of that in just a moment. I cannot wait. But first, a couple of quick announcements. The first is that my online Facebook group, the Food Psych Podcast Listener Crew, is really gaining momentum and is just such a fun place to be. So if you're a Facebook user, or even if you never use Facebook and you just want to be a part of this group, create a fake account just for this group. It's super worth it. I feel like everybody has been supporting each other in such amazing ways there. We've had such great discussions helping facilitate body positivity and recovery from disordered eating. And it's just a really wonderful place to be. So if you're listening to this and you haven't joined yet, you can join at christyharrison.com/community. That will redirect you to the Facebook group page. Just submit a request to join and I'll approve you and you can come on in. So that's christyharrison.com/community. The second thing I want to share with you is my intuitive eating fundamentals course, which you can find at christyharrison.com/course. It's a 13-week online course to help you make peace with food and learn to trust your body again. We work through all the principles of intuitive eating in depth and help you really troubleshoot everything that typically comes up for people as they're going through the principles. And it's all informed by body positivity and health at every size and size acceptance. So that's really infused throughout the course, as well as self-compassion. That's a huge foundation to what we're doing in the course because self-compassion has been shown to really help people make positive changes in all aspects of their lives, whether it's through relationships with food or anything else. So you'll learn all about self-compassion and about body positivity and health at every size as you're working through the principles of intuitive eating. So that you'll really end up with an understanding of intuitive eating that doesn't turn it into another diet or that isn't sort of pseudo body positive. You'll really be able to integrate the foundations of health at every size and size acceptance into your work with intuitive eating from the ground up. Just listen to what one of my participants recently said about the course. She said, "I've been on an unofficial diet for over 14 years, and my goal was always to make peace with food in my body before I turned 30 because I don't want to have my children going through the same as me. With this course, I finally feel this is possible. It gives me hope, it challenges my thoughts, it provides me help when I need it, and there are a lot of journal exercises that I truly enjoy. I'm thankful for being exposed to another anti-diet world, and I definitely see meal plans and weight loss apps through different eyes today. I can't say how grateful I am that I found this course, Christy, and all the members who support me daily through our Facebook group." So that was Julie, one of my course participants, and I'm really grateful to her and to everyone else who has given such great feedback in the course. If you want to join her and many other participants in the course and become a part of our exclusive Facebook group, you can find out more and sign up at christyharrison.com/course. That's christyharrison.com/course. And finally, if you love the podcast and want to help us reach more people, you can do that by leaving a great rating and review on iTunes. And by the way, make sure that you're subscribed in iTunes or whatever your favorite podcasting app is, because that really helps us out too, helps us reach more people. And if we have more regular subscribers, it will help with a project that I'm working on that I'm not quite ready to announce yet, but that I think you guys will love and that I'm super excited about. So that's just a little sneak preview of something to come down down the line. But meanwhile, make sure you're subscribed in iTunes and also leave us a nice rating and review, which you can do by going to iTunes from your computer or your podcasts app on your phone. Type in Food Psych to the search bar, click on the result that comes up under podcasts, and then click on the ratings and reviews section, and you can leave us a nice rating and review there. And all of those great ratings and reviews really make my day, make me so happy, and just feel like I'm doing good work in the world when I see how people are responding and appreciating the podcast. So thank you all for helping keep me going with those nice ratings and reviews. And leave yours today to help us grow and reach more people who need to hear the body positive message. All right, now without any further ado, let's go talk to Vivian McMaster. So tell me about your relationship with food growing up.
Yeah, in reflecting on this, it's been a really neat kind of jumping back into my history and picturing my great-grandparents' farm table. They lived on a farm and we would go visit quite a bit. And I feel like this is the heart of my history and relationship with food is the family element. My parents tended to be more of the health foodie types. I was born in the late 70s. And so growing up, I definitely had a natural foods world that I was in. But it also, I thought at the time it was just kind of them and the way they were. But my great-grandparents actually came from Latvia, small country in Eastern Europe. And so I grew up both with my parents having kind of a whole foods approach in our household. But I also grew up going to my great-grandparents' farm it felt like every other weekend. It might have been less frequent, but definitely a lot. And eating these gigantic celebratory meals, not only with our family members, everybody would kind of come for the big meals, but there was also always or often these extra Latvians. Like it was a very community to say, but there were, I don't know who they were.
Oh,
but
that's funny.
In Ontario, where I grew up, there's like a moderate Latvian population at that time where folks had come over. And so I think we were a bit of a hub of that, or there would often be people speaking this language I didn't really necessarily understand. And the food was very Latvian.
What was that like?
I just thought it was delicious at the time, but it was these buns with bacon in them and lots of sauerkraut. And most meals started with this beautiful kind of clearish brown broth. So my relationship to food at a pretty early age felt community-based. It felt very Latvian and very, they lived on a farm too. So a lot of things were picked and, the potatoes were grown there. The potatoes were a big part of the food in that area. And so, looking back, I feel pretty blessed in a way to have this joyous, delicious, like kind of rooting in my early years. Things got complicated kind of beyond that, but I've been smiling a lot thinking back to that. In my household, my immediate family too, we didn't farm or, now my parents grow garlic and they grow a fair amount of, the family tradition of growing your own food has been passed down. And I'm sure someday I'll be like, I need a plot of land to grow some garlic and
yeah, it's in your bones.
Grow my own potatoes. I know that's coming someday. But yeah, we had a very natural foods kind of approach in a time when that wasn't, it wasn't cool back then necessarily.
Right. Farming was not a thing. Farming was sort of weird and rural.
Yeah, exactly. And I'd go to friends' houses and be like, white bread, margarine. So it's like cheese in plastic. So there was definitely that element of like, other people don't eat like this. But also, and I feel like I had an understanding that this is just food from the earth, that other foods were a bit more complicated and they were made elsewhere. This was like, we tended to eat the kind of foods that you picked. And yeah.
That's interesting. Was there any language around that? Like, this food is better for you. This is, morally better. Or was it just sort of how it was and there wasn't a lot of discussion around it?
No, there wasn't a lot of discussion around it. I think probably because it was farming rooted. Like we, as an immediate family, we bought our food at the grocery store, but we didn't grow it all by any means other than the stuff we got brought home. But I don't remember there being an element of this is the best way to eat. This is the better way to eat. But at the same time, I do think my parents might have had a conscious, there was two daughters, my sister and I, and then we have a younger brother. And the way that I saw our food relationship as us growing up to when he was a teen, he's quite a bit younger than us. And suddenly when we were all out of the house, there was like Skippy peanut butter. There was more junky food. It was a different time. But I also, though it wasn't kind of verbally put out there, I do wonder if there was an element of, wanting to make sure the daughters ate a certain way or had this, like, we didn't have a scale in the house. I haven't actually talked to my mother about this, but like, if there was kind of our daughters need to eat really healthy. And I do think it was with heart, like the lack of a scale. Like, I think they had on their minds, like, we want these girls to have a healthy relationship to their bodies. And that gets complicated. What is healthy?
Sure.
Right?
Yeah. Yeah. It sort of can be filtered through many different philosophies.
Yeah. It didn't feel like we were better than anyone else because we ate this way, or that we were worse in any way. Like, it just felt like this is how I feel like that joy of food that, we got from our great grandparents. And there was a part of that, like we kind of like to eat.
Mm-hmm.
Even though I do see like bits of restriction in other family members because diet culture permeates us. Most people, unless you're actively trying to disengage from it, most of us have an element of, oh, I'm trying to eat healthy, like that orthorexic. Not that I don't think my family members fit into that category of being orthorexic, but I definitely think unless you're actively trying to disengage from it, it permeates a lot of us in the way we exist.
That's such a good point. Yeah, because I think families that don't have any overt disordered eating symptoms can still sort of absorb and transmit those kinds of messages like, oh, this is healthy, this is not, it's like really tough to have language around different types of food, I think, that doesn't shame or sort of demonize certain choices and elevate others. It's like you have to really consciously try to be neutral about food.
Yeah. Yeah. And, I think the joy that we had around food did help me keep neutral about it in some ways, but I definitely did feel complicated. When I went to high school, I remember this one day of feeling like I had a bagel with cream cheese and I didn't really want it. I can't remember if I got food in the cafeteria, but I remember asking my friends at the table, hey, does anyone want this bagel and cream cheese? I'm not going to eat it. And they were like, well, what kind of bagel? Is it low fat? What kind of cream cheese is this? They were like grilling me, and I was like, I remember having this feeling of like, not that what's going on with them, like why do they need to know this? But like, oh my God, there's this something I'm supposed to know about food and I don't know it. Like this awakening of, oh God, diet culture. I didn't have this language at the time, but nobody told me I'm supposed to count calories. Nobody told me I'm supposed to look at my food and think that I should only have a certain amount, or I there definitely was like some overeating in my childhood, and I'll share a little bit more of kind of I think what spurred that on. But I do feel like my early years, in retrospect, there was a gift of like not having this diet culture, but unfortunately, it felt like a rude awakening to be like, oh, I got to catch up. Like, what's going on?
Yeah, like I've been doing it wrong.
Yeah. I felt like for a lot of my life that there's been this like how to be a woman manual that like I never got. And all these, like, there was another moment where some friend was like, don't you get tired of like holding in your stomach all the time? And I remember thinking like, oh, nobody told, like, just this messed up, like not cluing in that the fact that I didn't, quote unquote, know these things was a blessing. But I spent my teen years thinking that I just didn't know how to do all these things or be what everybody else seemed to be doing. It was a very strange thing to, yeah. And then, getting caught up in trying to be that too.
Yeah, because you felt like that's how everybody else was, and that was the thing to do.
Yeah.
I really identify with that. I think I managed to get through my teen years oblivious to all of that because I guess none of my friends were really into it or whatever. Or I did have one friend with anorexia, but I was kind of like, oh, that's her thing over there. That has nothing to do with me. Not seeing, the sort of spectrum of disordered eating at that time and like how other friends and family sort of fell into that. But in college, when I started on my first diet, that was when I sort of had this awakening too of like, oh my God, this is because I definitely had that feeling of like, there's a manual about how to be a woman and I don't know where it is and I've never read it and I'm just fumbling around in the dark here. And then suddenly I discovered diet culture and was like, oh my God, like this is it,
We got to throw out the book. It's like not a manual anybody needs.
No, it's really not. But it's that, that feeling of sort of connecting to something where you're like, oh, maybe I get it now. Maybe this is it. I think that is really what fuels a lot of people's continued pursuit of dieting because, usually you're chasing the dragon of that first diet and that first feeling like, oh, I got this now. And it never comes back and it never lasts, right? But you're always kind of pursuing that.
Totally. Yeah.
So yeah, I fully identify with that. But yeah, so what was going on when you were younger in terms of the overeating?
My growing up until about 10 to 12 was that kind of joyous thing I've been sharing and a healthy relationship to food, I think. And then around 12, my family things started to shift. And I'm going to tell this story with like holding my family with great compassion. I think about 5 years ago, I would have told this without a lot of anger, but I don't have it. I don't have that now.
That's great.
Yeah, work. We do. That's what happens when
we work through it. Yep. Yes.
But a family member in my immediate family started having the symptoms of this condition called misophonia. And I think we know that the term miso, like misogyny. So it's the hatred of, and then phonia is sound. So they started reacting to the sounds around them in a very, I think it's something to do with your nervous system. It's very like they react to sounds in a way that they just need them to stop. And at this time, there was no one, even the person who kind of put the word, the doctor who kind of came up with the actual condition and researched it at this time, was not even doing that research. It was before that time. So our dinner table went from being, just regular kind of family dinner tables. We did eat most of our dinners together to being a very tense and triggering place. And folks with misophonia usually have one or two primary family members that are their trigger people. And I was that trigger person. So from about 12 or so, I think it was that age, the sounds that I make while I eat, swallowing, even the noise of my breathing, but a lot of like food related sounds were the core trigger. And so our dinner table setting ended up being pretty unbearable, I think, for all of us to sit through and very tense. And my parents ended up putting this picnic basket in between the two of us, and which didn't help because I could still get kicked under the table. Like I get the idea that they would by visually blocking us, but it wasn't about sight. It was about sound, right?
And they didn't understand that at the time, or?
No, and they couldn't have. So our teen years was this like highly tense setting. So and my reaction to hearing that, I had no idea that they had this medical condition. So I just thought that what I was doing, the sounds I was making, the way I was eating was wrong. So suddenly food became this place where I was doing it wrong. And I didn't get insulted a lot around this, but the word disgusting was one of the core, like, that's disgusting, you're disgusting, was what I got, as well as looks and just anger around me eating. So you could see how this like joyous young Vivian shifted to this like, oh God, like I'm disgusting. And it's enough in our teen years to try to figure out who we are. And so to get these messages of you're disgusting, you eat wrong, you drink wrong, swallow wrong, made me very disconnected from my body. I just thought that's what the whole world thought. I knew my parents didn't think that, but your parents are your parents. I didn't
Right.
I didn't think they represented the rest of the world, but I did. I took it as I'm disgusting. I'm doing this wrong. And I could see that other people at the table were kind of were triggering them too, but I was the primary person around this time. And so that changed things. And it definitely, I started eating a lot faster. I just wanted the food in and over with. I feel like it zapped like the joy of eating out of the dinner table for me. And I feel like I'm very much still trying to return to that presence that I think I had before that era of, and I do sometimes kind of return to that, like just, the delicious tastes of things. Like sometimes I just feel so joyous and present with my food. And other times I still just, there's an element I think of trying to feel safe, or it feels a bit like, I just want to eat and get it done with, and then it'll be okay. I will stop making those noises and we'll be fine. And now we can talk, you know, just trying to get food over with. So there was definitely a disconnection, and for me, an element of overeating because I wasn't being present. I wasn't listening to hunger and fullness anymore. I was just trying to get it done with.
Right. Yeah. Just clean your plate and move on kind of thing.
There's a comfort in food. Like it did make me feel, oh, I got to feed you. At least let's get the food in. And so that was my whole rest of my time at living at home. And we're a family with misophonia. We still are. And it's something that I read a lot about and care deeply about helping us as a family work through it. And you don't hear about this condition. A lot of people out there have it. A lot of people probably will listen to this and be like, oh, yeah, I get really irritated when I hear noises. And we all do. But there's like another level to this that some people can't like leave their houses. They can't have a functioning work life, like their lives are ruled by this. I'll probably talk a little bit about where my work life went and where my kind of life path went. I wouldn't be who I am doing the work I do in the world now without that. So that's where the compassion comes from. Something good out of this tough situation and that none of us asked for. And that wasn't, it was a condition. But I did leave my teen years with incredibly low self-esteem.
I'm sure.
Yeah.
Because when you're made to feel like something very basic and just sort of part of who you are and intuitive is wrong and bad, and you had no idea you were doing it wrong. God, what a like shaming feeling, right? And of course, it's going to cause you to disconnect from who you authentically are and just like look at yourself from the outside and be like, well, how can I sort of minimize the reaction to this that other people are having?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Like, how do I, even in public, when I'm eating meals with groups of people I don't know, I go to lots of art retreats or, events. And I definitely, still notice, or in the past few years, I've noticed the way that I just try to make sure I'm not irritating people. It's a hard thing to kind of get yourself out of, worrying what everybody else, but I eat just fine. I may not be the tidiest eater, but I'm a joyous eater. Like that's my relationship now is like, I don't care if I don't have the best manners or my manners are just fine. That if I don't fit into a perfect, quiet, tidy, I love eating. It's fun. I'm returning to that again. Food is pleasurable, and I have a more healthy relationship these days to hunger and fullness, and have been exploring intuitive eating, and I want the joy back.
Yeah. And it's cool that you had it at one point and can kind of recognize how that felt and like have a little bit of a guiding light to get back there. Because I think that makes it somewhat easier than, people who've never had that. I think it's obviously it's possible for everyone because we're born with it. But I think it's harder work to invest in something that you've never experienced.
Yeah, absolutely.
What happened with your relationship with food from there then?
Another twist in the story happened when about 16, I was falling asleep in school all the time. All the time. And I think I had some pretty intense fatigue for all of high school, but it was around 16 where they thought I had mono. We had to figure out what was going on. But I literally remember like my pen dropping and I slept fine at night. It wasn't a lack of sleep. And I have a gluten allergy. This was long before that was cool.
Right.
Long before that was cool. And in a way, I'm kind of grateful that if I had to realize had a gluten allergy, that it would have been way back then, because it's so much more complicated now. That said, there's so much more I can actually eat now. But at that time, because I just remember eating rice cakes. I will never eat a rice cake again.
Oh,
but
yeah, same. Also was part of my eating disorder was like rice cakes. And I will never, there's no point. What's the point?
No,
I mean, if you love rice cakes, it's fine, but I just do not love rice cakes. So
I can eat those corn cakes. They are not rice cakes.
Yeah, that's true. Because rice cakes are just so dry. You need a little fat in it to like give it some body, I think.
Right. But that was the closest thing I had to bread at that time. But so yeah, there was like nothing I could eat in terms of what you could get easily accessible. But on one hand, I feel like at that age, without the gluten-free diet culture looming over my head, I feel like learning this about myself and seeing how some foods fuel you and some foods do not fuel you, especially if you have an allergy to it. I feel like it did kind of get me in touch again after that stage of being quite numb to what I was eating. I feel like it got me in touch with the foods that fuel me again, in a not that like good food, bad food kind of way, because I wasn't being told in magazines or on every blog, not that blogs existed then, but what good and bad foods were. I got to understand in a non-diet culture way what was helping me stay awake or feel more alive again and what was really not. And over the years, I've definitely had to like question the gluten-free world and the way I exist in it. And, the fact that, sometimes I'm like, I'm gluten-free. Sometimes you have to like tell the world. And why do I do that? Why do I have to tell people? I've kind of stopped myself and worked on that around the way we announce ourselves and our relationship to food in a room and the way that affects other people. It did heal me way to get to stop eating gluten was what my body needed at that age.
That's such a good point about the distinction between gluten-free diet culture now and the lack of it then, because I think that's a really challenging thing I see with people who do have legitimate food allergies and not, I mean, there's also the whole sort of phenomenon of like disordered eating or eating disorders causing some of the same symptoms and getting misdiagnosed, which is, that's like a whole other can of worms. But for people who have the true allergy, it's like, or celiac disease, having to keep gluten out of your diet is important and it's self-care. But then how do you square that with like not falling into that good and bad rhetoric and not becoming like moralizing about gluten? So it's really tough now. I really empathize with people who have to navigate that these days.
Yeah. Yeah. And, there's been times over the years, definitely once I was once I actually had to do the cooking for myself, where I did eat gluten again. Or, in my 20s where I was like, oh, beer, I know that has gluten, but
but it's delicious.
But that's what everybody's drinking. And where I've had to, okay, I really can't do this. If I want to, it really does bring me a degree of fatigue that I can't be present and active in this world. And it bothers me the way it has kind of become the new way of eating, that a lot of people, that wheat has been moralized, because there's so many beautiful grains out there that some people can digest easier than others. And
and it's interesting too that that's become this sort of moral battleground, whereas something like shellfish, which a lot of people are also allergic to, is not. There's not this like anti-shellfish movement in the same way.
It's so true.
It has occurred to me at various points, like how bizarre it is, but also how understandable given the diet culture, the sort of groundwork of just regular diet culture, I think set the stage for gluten-free diet culture because, I think it was coming out of the low carb trend that made people fear carbs. And then suddenly here's this new specific type of carb to fear, and also kind of an explanation of why low carb diets don't work long term, and why, yes, it's still about the carbs, but it's this nuance here that like is a new thing that you can jump on board with and sort of explains why you're still having trouble,
Mm-hmm.
So I think there's like something there about, it like that wouldn't have happened in the 80s or 90s probably, because in the 80s or 90s, it was all about fat.
Yeah.
Low fat everything, not low carb. So,
Oh, man.
yeah. I'm sure there's something written about this somewhere, and I'm not the first to say it, but it's interesting to consider, because it is a culture. There are trends and movements. And, if you sort of just, I think when you come of age in a particular moment in time, you can sort of think this is how it's always been, or this is how it is.
Mm-hmm.
Or when you wake up to diet culture, whatever age you're at, really. But like, when you're first indoctrinated into it, it's like, okay, here's how things are. And then kind of seeing it in this larger picture, to me, that was very helpful in my recovery, kind of being like, oh, right, there's all these diet trends that have happened over the years that say polar opposite things to each other. And you can see the lineages of different diet trends, one developing from another. It just gives it a little more context and helps, I think, push back against the sort of sense that like, no, this is the truth and this is the way,
Yeah, absolutely.
So it sounds like that didn't lead you into a disordered place then. Like it was taking gluten out for you was actually helpful and helped you sort of feel better in your body rather than kind of more restrictive.
It did, though I do see the ways that any restriction, even if it's for health, like for medical reasons like that, I do see the way there's this dance of restriction, and that I do think it did affect me. How could it not? I'm restricting something. I do see the way that played into it. So I've listened to a lot of your show, and there's this thing that I hear often that people share, especially when they're talking about going into eating disorders as a theme, that this perfectionism piece comes up. And I don't have a perfectionist piece. Like I'm not an A-type person. And in a way, I think there were so many things that could have led me towards more disordered behavior. But as a plus size woman too, I wasn't kind of getting those messages that if you just look like this, you'll attract more boys, or like I felt very invisible in my life, which throughout a lot of my life. And I think that was coming from that wanting to be invisible at the dinner table, just wanting to be quiet and not heard and not seen. But I feel like in a way, this invisibility felt like a curse at the time.
Mm-hmm.
I hope this is making sense.
No, it totally is.
In a way, it ended up feeling like a bit of a blessing, because I didn't get caught in those traps of, well, if you just lose pounds, you'll look this way, or I didn't end up feeling like society was going to give me those prizes you get for being a certain size, or like I felt exempt from that because of that horrible message of like, you're disgusting. But I feel like it didn't. I was like, well, I'm not going to be that person. I'm not going to be that successful, or not that low self-esteem is a blessing, but I feel like it helped me not get caught in this trap of like, if I only do this, if I only do this. And so what I had to recover from was the low self-esteem rather than the trap of always trying to fit the norm or be this perfect body, or do you know what I mean?
Totally. Yeah, I think it's interesting how sometimes things in our lives that weren't particularly helpful in and of themselves can still be protective against something worse.
Yeah.
I mean, I've shared this on the podcast before that I was very codependent in my relationships for a long time. And codependency, I think, is what set me down the path of eating disorder recovery, really, because I was changing myself to try to fit a boyfriend who was a foodie and who loved food and wanted me to be adventurous around food. And I felt that and just molded myself to fit. So I kind of consciously forced myself to like put the eating disorder behaviors aside, at least while I was with him. And then we spent more and more time together. And I was so invested in this codependent dynamic that won over the eating disorder. But Of course, then I just stayed in disordered eating for a long time and didn't fully recover for a while. I would not recommend codependency to anyone as a strategy for healthy relationships or a good life. But, in that case, it did save me in a way. So
yeah,
it's interesting, these things in our lives, you never really know where something is going to lead you.
Oh, I feel like that's a theme for me. It's like, that was really hard and you made something good out of it. Or like, that was really hard and you know, but the other side of it is that you avoided this.
Right. Yeah. It reminds me of, there's this Buddhist story that I'm sure I'm going to totally boggle, but like it's something like an old man has like a farm or something, and soldiers come in to take all of the young men to go to war, but he has a son who has like a broken leg or a bum foot or something like that. And so they don't take him, and everybody's like, what a blessing. And the man's like, we'll see, like wait and see kind of thing. And then something else happens where, because whatever, it just keeps going back and forth. It's like, oh, it was bad that he had this foot. Actually, it was a blessing. No, actually, it's a problem because now this is happening. But actually, that turned out okay because he avoided this. And throughout life, it just sort of ebbs and flows like that. So you can never really say with any certainty whether something is good or bad.
Yeah.
Which I think is a helpful lesson for a lot of things in life, whether you're in a difficult moment or you just have a tendency to see things as black and white. It's like, maybe there's some shades of gray here that I'm not acknowledging.
Yeah.
Yeah. So for you, it sounds like this low self-esteem kind of kept you stuck in one way, but also kept you from going down the rabbit hole of like, what if I change my body? How about that?
Yeah. I didn't try to meet societal standards. And I mean, I did in some ways, but not in terms of diet and food. I had this moment. I think this is actually how I found your podcast. I was like, must listen to everything Linda Bacon has ever been interviewed on.
Nice.
There was this moment, I feel like it was when she was talking about her story or health at every size, where our bodies are trying to protect us and they're just trying to get back to equilibrium. And I had this moment listening where it was like, oh my God, for my whole life, I have thought, well, up until kind of my early 30s, I'm in my late 30s now, that every time I had to eat another meal, I was failing it. I saw myself as like a diet culture failure, that like, because I was hungry, I'm hungry for breakfast and then lunch and then dinner. And so I had this like narrative of like, you're failing, you're always failing this book of how to be a woman. And then I remember this moment of listening where I was like, oh my God, I never failed. Nobody ever fails. But like my body was just asking to be fed, and that's okay. And so I feel like in the last few years that it's just this one little piece, but it felt like it released so much of like, you never failed. You're, just listen in. And what I love about intuitive eating and that approach is that everything is information. It's not that you like overate and this and you're bad. It's like, oh, that doesn't feel so good. Like, what information is here? And not that you have to do better next time, but just that piece of like, we can constantly learn about our bodies. And if we take the good and bad out of it, it's a beautiful relationship to be constantly learning and like not seeing yourself as succeeding or failing at just being in your body.
Right. And learning like what fuels you and what feels good, and sort of, taking the morality out of it. It's like, oh, right. Like I certainly identify with that. I think so many people in diet culture have had that feeling of like, you're a failure because you're hungry, which is ridiculous, but it's what we're told all the time. And it's what we're like, going back to that book of How to Be a Woman, it's like, oh, you shouldn't need too much, and I always have a snack in the afternoon. It's how I've been wired forever. But, at one point I was fighting against that, and it would feel like I was failing if I had the snack and if I gave in or whatever. And when I learned about intuitive eating and realized like, no, your body's going to be sending out hunger signals every few hours, and that's normal. And what about just building it in? What about saying like, this is snack time now? That was such a huge revelation to me, because I was like, oh, right, I don't have to feel bad. And like when I do eat the snack and it's just part of my day, I feel more energetic. I feel clearer headed. I don't have a crash in the afternoon. Like I just get all these benefits from it physically.
Mm-hmm.
And I also emotionally can just like do it and move on rather than fighting with
Yeah,
myself for hours, you know? So
exactly.
it's like, what's the
Yeah.
point of fighting?
Yeah.
But we're told that we're going to get some sort of reward for fighting, or that it's just unseemly for us to need, to desire, right? That's interesting though. So it sounds like you didn't sort of full on go into diet culture or like try really hard with it, but you still just absorb those messages like we all do in our culture.
Absolutely. And yeah, it goes hand in hand kind of with low self-esteem. And I just felt like a diet failure my whole life, essentially.
Yeah, it's like, oh, I can't do that. I'm
Yeah. Never kind of doing it right. And then thankfully, I don't believe that anymore. And all these years I've been fueling my body because I needed to.
Yes.
Yeah. And I think especially when you don't eat gluten, I always feel hungrier in a different way than I'm witnessing people around me because I'm not having those kind of foods. And I always shamed myself for needing to eat more food than other people. But I also like, when yeah, it's complicated talking about the gluten-free part, but
Mhm.
I'm just hungry all the time and that's natural.
Yeah.
Maybe because I am allergic to that I feel hungrier than maybe other people who have that piece of, because bread fills you a fair amount.
Hmm.
So I always, yeah, shamed myself for not only needing to eat, but needing to eat a fair amount to feel full. But so, I definitely didn't make it out of diet culture without some effects of it, but I definitely didn't go down the road that I hear so many folks on your podcast.
Yeah. It sounds like not having that sort of perfectionistic wiring was also helpful.
Yeah.
I think that is, to be able to kind of be a little more flexible and not have to do things perfectly is such a blessing and something that really we all need more of.
Yeah. And as an entrepreneur sometimes, because I am not a perfectionist, but I am deeply passionate about what I do. Like I do kind of compare myself too, and like everybody's producing so much all the time and I'm just out doing my work. But realizing that I'm not a perfectionist and that's okay. And we can function in different ways, whether it's with food or our work, and we all get to do it our own way, and that's okay.
Totally. And I think people will resonate with that too. I think, there's really something valuable and beautiful about just kind of doing your craft and being absorbed in that and not
Yeah.
getting caught up by all the noise, I will say, like, I think that was in my journalism career, because that my first career was as a journalist. I sort of stumbled into that as a way that I could actually be productive and get my job done, just like not thinking about the outcome, just focusing on shitty, first draft,
Yeah.
like get something in there and then refine and work through it. And I have an editor too, so I can send it to my editor. If I'm writing something, someone else is always editing me versus, if I'm editing someone else, I can kind of be that more refined, give that more refined look at it. I don't have to do that with myself and my own work. And so through the years, like as I worked for a magazine where my supervisor was really kind of obsessed with the idea of winning awards and applying for different awards and achievements and, sort of looking at website traffic and all this different stuff. And I told him, I was like, I have to not be aware of that. I have to not be conscious of that, or it will impair my ability to do my job. Like I have to sort of shut it out. So
Yeah.
I would like to not be part of these discussions. And it was really helpful to just do that. And that sort of was the approach I took for a long time to my work, even in sort of the early days of the podcast. But I actually feel like as I've gotten more ambitious about what I'm trying to do with my business and as I've grown the podcast, I've fallen into this comparison mind a little bit and this sense of like, well, everybody else is producing so much and like more content, yeah. And it's really hard. So that's something I'm still dancing with and trying to figure out how to approach. Like, how much can I do the thing of just keeping my head down and being in my work? And how much do I need to be a part of those larger conversations,
And I also feel like there's a book right now of like how to have, a podcast and a business online, and like that wasn't there when I started too. So I'm really resisting the like must look this way, must have this many followers. Like the book didn't work for me the first time. I'm not falling for that trap this time.
I love that.
Oh, like I do see it happening where it's like now there's a book on how to have a business, even around body positivity, which, is the common thing with a lot of us, that there seems like there's a manual on how to do it these days. And we compare ourselves to other people and how they're doing it. And I got to trust that if I don't fall for all of the pieces of it, then that's okay.
I love that. Yeah.
Yeah, I do feel like that's been a gift of creating work that I love that kind of comes out of that era is
You didn't have that pressure.
no, yeah, I started teaching online photography classes based around self-portraiture as a tool for, at first it was more like creative. There wasn't, 5 years ago, body positivity was different. Fat acceptance was a big part of my world at that time, but it was not, it was more the people around me. Like it wasn't online in the same way it is now.
It's really interesting because I think some of the early adopters and the people who trailblazed in having like blogs or podcasts or whatever in this movement have stopped doing the work. And now there's this new guard that's taken over, like it's sort of sad because I feel like there's not a lot of institutional memory of what went before. Like I'm seeing people share stuff that's like, oh yeah, 5 years ago, Golda Paretsky wrote about that or whatever, and not that it's not important stuff to be talked about and shared, but I just feel like the sort of credit maybe is not being given. And beyond that, it's like Marilyn Wan and, all these amazing, like the sort of early fat acceptance activists, like we need to be giving credit and nods to those folks too, I think.
Oh my gosh, yes. Yeah. And it doesn't feel like that's happening. It doesn't feel like that's, especially, kind of the new guard, as you said, and not folks in particular, but people are like, it's a whole new world that people are discovering as through the leaders nowadays. And then it feels like a lot of people learn about it and then they start becoming the leaders themselves. Like we do need to do a lot more looking back, and especially in terms of fat acceptance. Like it's a long-standing fight that people have been doing, and there is a fair amount of fat acceptance that feels like it's still missing for body positivity these days.
Absolutely. Yeah, I think it's the body positive movement's getting co-opted by people who are saying like, love your curves as a conventionally attractive thin person, right?
Yes,
and like,
totally,
not all bodies fit, all bodies belong, and showing and representing diverse bodies and having difficult conversations about privilege and where the edges are in our own body positive experience.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And one kind of interesting thing for me in the past year, especially because my work is around imagery and stepping into your visual story and finding because what photography and self-portraiture in particular helped me find my voice about who I was again and how I saw my body outside of those outside narratives, both from my family and also from diet culture and society. And like, how do I feel about this body? I know those noises I make don't make me a bad person. Let's move and dance and be. And in the last like 10 years of taking self-portraits, I feel like I now kind of have regrounded myself in how I see myself, which gets so easily taken away from us. But in terms of like the body positive culture now, I'm seeing kind of the work I'm doing in the way that I approach self-portraiture. And then I'm seeing this culture of fairly conventionally acceptable body types making their rolls and curves and having a lot of nudity. And that is awesome. But that's only one kind of body positive photo. A body positive photo can be the tips of your toes, with a leaf you found on the ground that you think is pretty. And then that's the first time you've seen your body in any way in a photo in 10 years. That's been people who I work with where like that's a body positive photo for them, to just see themselves in any way, like their fingertips, they're like the tips of their toes. That's as powerful to me as more nudity or like that's another element of healing how you see your body. But I think there's a big void that a lot of us are missing, that like not everybody can jump to taking a nude selfie online, and that might not be their path. But I feel like that's become the norm of like a visual representation of loving your body. And I want to bring more voice back to, well, that's for them. What about you? Like, does that resonate? Is that something you'd like to do? Or, for me, a lot of my exploration of my body in images has been through movement and dance and figuring out, like, because I literally had to sit still for much of my teen years to not be irritating, to not be triggering. I still sit on my hands in the car with my family. Like I still, like I have, there was a really strong element of just stay still. So I move and I dance and I like, it's not as cool as somebody else's body positive photos, but it's mine. It's my story. It's what heals me. So that whole, the book again, the manual of how to take a selfie or how to like see yourself in images, like let's throw it out and get to know the person looking back at you. If photography is or selfies are a tool that could help somebody, like it helped me find myself again. And I do see for me the relationship that it had to my past with food, and also I really try to work with people around neutrality. Like we see a photo and we see it as bad or good. I think it's another kind of canvas where we can take out that relationship of like, well, I see my part of my body as bad in this image, or like, oh, there's a good selfie. No, like let's work to find a neutral place. Like there I am. Like that's where I feel like I got, and not that we're ever completely healed from any of this, but now I look at a photo and I'm like, oh, there are my arms, not my bad arms or my good arms, just my arms.
I love that. And that's what I love about your work too. I mean, so I have sort of negative reactions to the nude selfies and the rolls and all that being on display, because I feel like, I mean, for some people it is truly empowering and that's great. And I feel like with certain photos and certain people doing that, you can see that that's who they truly are and that's who they want to be. And I fully support that. But I think there is like this sort of manual that people are following that like, oh, that's what I have to do to be body positive. Or even, sort of subtle ways in which people are not even realizing that they're falling into this sexualized role that women and femmes are called to be in. And to me, as a survivor of sexual assault, and many of my clients and people I work with as survivors of sexual assault, I feel like that is not the sort of dynamic that I want to be a part of, or that it can be triggering and it can be off-putting to people who, seeing your body in a sexualized way is very personal and private and not something you want to put on display.
Yeah.
So I think it's really powerful to see your work as an alternative to that and as sort of a range of possible options. Like, you have selfies of like your feet and your hands and love it, and they're all like loving and compassionate. And I can sort of just feel the compassion and non-judgment in that. And then you have photos of your body and your face. And like, again, it's like that same sort of loving and compassionate vibe, but it doesn't feel forced. It doesn't feel like I'm showing this now because I'm supposed to, And so, I think to anyone who has felt compelled to share those types of photos, it's like, I just want to say, like, it's okay not to. It's okay, you have permission to not do that and to do whatever actually feels really authentic and good to you. And, for some people, reclaiming their sexuality is a big part of healing from trauma or from diet culture or whatever. And that's also great for them, but it doesn't mean it has to be everybody's journey.
Absolutely. Yeah. And it's something, I haven't taught a class about selfies. So there are a million out there. There's so many people who are teaching that kind of like love your body through this. And I can recommend, there's one that I deeply trust in the way she teaches it, but sometimes it does worry me, other folks who I'm like, but yeah, that what you just shared, I think we have to be critical of why or question why we're taking certain photos, and are they really for ourselves, and what do we really want to take? Because believe me, I think I'd have a lot more followers if I fit the norm of what a body positive photo should be, but I can't, only because it's not what I feel like. That's where my healing is. That might be other people's healing, but my healing is through the camera, is through the simple moments and the beauty that I'm finding, and including myself in that beauty. And it feels very important to me to be practicing what I'm preaching all the time. And also, you want to kind of be on further ahead in the path of those you're teaching. You want to not be an expert per se, but like not be teaching from like, I just realized this today, and so I'm going to teach it to you today. you know, you want to kind of have that, be able to reflect back, and so it's really important to me to keep learning and discovering, and to be practicing this along with folks. I go out on photo walks and take a fair amount of photos, and I do all of this for me, for the healing effects that it has for me. I don't take photos thinking like, oh, what will people like? I feel like it's been kind of unfortunate the way selfies have become synonymous with being shared. Like you can take a photo completely for yourself. And I encourage people, if you're thinking of using it as a tool for self-esteem and for seeing yourself with compassion, take the other people out of it. Come back to meeting yourself in the image, and take your photo for yourself first and foremost, and then I decide to share some afterwards. But I feel like if we're always thinking about what other people are thinking, or how are they going to react to that, or how many likes am I going to get, that doesn't serve us at all.
No, it just keeps us stuck in that comparison mind and that sort of living for everyone else.
Yeah. Reminds me of sitting at the table, and is everyone else going to think of what I'm eating? Like we have to find our way back to connecting. I know you've interviewed Rachel Cole, and she has that "what am I truly hungry for" message. And so really just returning to like, what kind of photo am I hungry to take, and what are the messages I really need to offer myself.
And that looks different for everyone.
Yeah, exactly. But listening to ourselves again, be it in food and or through the camera, and hearing our own voice and what it has to say, and outside of the darn book that we've been trying to
I love that metaphor. It's so applicable to so many areas of life,
It is. And just the fact that we think we're failing if we have a outtake. I don't even like calling photos a bad photo, because it's just an outtake, like it's a photo that maybe you don't feel resonant with yourself in, or an angle that isn't the way that you can see yourself with compassion. And doesn't mean that we're good or bad, or that our worthiness is defined by that.
Totally. Yeah. I think that's so powerful. How did you get into doing this work?
Yeah. I started taking self-portraits. The word selfie wasn't around yet. It wasn't that long ago, but it's just the way the world is going these days.
Yeah.
I actually went through depression in my late 20s, so a decade ago. And coming out of that, I knew that I was really lonely from myself, and knew that I kind of needed to get back to myself again. It was very much at the same time as I was ditching diet culture and reconnecting with and really starting to actively heal that piece from my childhood about the messages I was getting. And I happened to get a phone that had a camera in it. So I am a product of digital photography and that accessibility that happened. And quite quickly, I fell down the beautiful rabbit hole of both photography and self-portrait photography. And I felt fairly quickly that this was the medium that was going to help me find myself again. I didn't plan to make it my work life. I could hear my own voice again through the lens. And so I just took a lot of photos, a lot. I quickly took it on as a daily practice. And within a year, it started to be something I actively shared online. And then within a few years, I started teaching classes. At first, not about healing body image, but because I needed a couple years to do my own work. But I was always from the beginning kind of slipping in the self-love messages between talking about aperture and shutter speed and how to use your timer. And I still share the technology of taking a self-portrait when I teach, but it's really not about that anymore, because I think that gets in our way. And our tools are so accessible now. And so now my work is pretty much completely focused on being the narrator of your own story again, and learning to see yourself with the same reverence that you would someone else in a photo. And I can only guide I am not a therapist. I try to give people the tools to do the work that I've done for myself. And I try to make it playful and creative because it is. I'm not out there taking self-portraits, analyzing everything, and I'm playing, and play is healing, and the camera can be a playful healing place. So I try to get people to connect with the camera in that way. And the healing happens when we allow ourselves to explore this creative tool and the person awaiting us there. So I came to the work through my own healing. And now it's what I do completely for work. It's just teach these online classes. And I also do photo shoots as well, but that is also woven through it is this element of loving, getting to witness yourself and see yourself through my lens, hopefully with compassion. It often ends up being people who've taken my classes or are familiar with my work who come to me for photo shoots too, which is a delight.
Yeah, I know. I love that work. And I love the name of your program too. It's Be Your Own Beloved, which is so beautiful and just very inspiring, because I think that's what a lot of us need when we come to this work, is to see ourselves through the eyes of someone who loves us.
Yeah.
Which hopefully the process of photographing yourself can contribute to that, right?
Yeah.
And I think it's really powerful.
Definitely doing it your way.
Yes. So tell us where people can find you and find out more about the course and everything else you offer.
Sure. BeYourOwnBeloved.com is my online home. I do also, of course, no surprise, love Instagram. My main account is Vivian MCM. I should spell that out because it's VIVIENNEMCM. And that's the same with Twitter. But Instagram is my happy place. And I have recently started a Be Your Own Beloved Instagram account where I'm sharing other people's photos, because it feels really important to me to keep sharing my realizations and my path on my own Instagram, because I know it just helps people to witness somebody else's journey. And so I also have a Be Your Own Beloved Instagram where I want to share other people's stories and highlight their images, and also, of course, have a more diverse range than you see on my Instagram, because it's just me. To kind of honor the importance, which I do a lot of work around in my classes, is the more it's important to see ourselves reflected in the images around us. So I want that to be a way for people to find it.
I love it. I love your work so much. So I'm going to link to all of those in the show notes so people can find it. Oh, so great talking with you, Vivian. I'm so glad we made this happen.
Yeah, me too. Thank you.
So that's our show. Thanks again so much to our guests for being here and to you guys for listening. And we'll be back again next week with another brand new episode. Meanwhile, I'd love to stay in touch. And the best way to do that is via email. So you can go to christyharrison.com/email to sign up for my VIP list. I'll send you info about new episodes of the podcast as they drop, as well as exclusive sneak previews of new episodes, exclusive giveaways and other special deals on the products and services I offer, special tips on how to make peace with food and learn to trust your body, and a whole lot more. Sign up at christyharrison.com/email. You can also subscribe via iTunes and leave us a nice rating and review, which is a great way to get the word out about the podcast and help other people find these important messages. Just go to iTunes from your computer or your podcasts app, type in Food Psych to the search bar, click on the result that comes up under podcasts, and then click on ratings and reviews, and you can leave a rating and review right there. And I really appreciate all the 5-star reviews and wonderful ratings that we've gotten, because it's helped us climb really high right now in the rankings. So we're currently in the top 50 of all health podcasts. And that's really cool because we're competing against some of the diet mentality, sort of traditional weight management and body shaming types of messages that I'm trying to fight with this podcast. So we've really started to beat out a lot of the diety voices. And I'd love to continue climbing higher in the rankings to get this message out even further. So please leave us a nice rating and review. It's so very much appreciated. And thanks to everyone who's left reviews so far. The music you're hearing behind me now is by a band called AWOL, and the track is called Food, used under the Creative Commons license. Thanks so much for listening, and until next time, stay psyched.
Stupid or scared, no work in the kitchen now. Who put you there in that perfect position now? Bullies want your food, and you ain't really beat. Have you ever went over your friend's house to eat?